learning about language. Now, I'm kind of role-taking therapists who may be listening to this who could say, why should I bother? I understand. Not everybody has to be doing what I'm doing here, okay? But I'm just offering this as a way to think about how good therapists are language artists. We know how to phrase things and frame things. We know how to listen for the language system of our client and then adapt it. I mean, we are good at it. Our work is a conversational art form. If you choose to, you can apply that in the public domain as well, if you choose to.
Welcome to Therapist Uncensored. Building on decades of professional experience, this podcast tackles neurobiology, modern attachment, and more in an honest way that's helpful in healing humans. Your session begins now with Dr. Ann Kelley and Sue Marriott.
Hey everyone, welcome back to Therapist Uncensored. I'm Ann Kelley, and today I'm super excited to share a conversation that I had with our guest today that I feel like feels more urgent than ever. So I met our guest, Bill Doherty, at last year's Psychotherapy Network conference. I attended a panel. It was really challenging, but super inspirational. It was with Esther Perel and Monica Guzman and Bill about bridging divides, and they were exploring how polarization shows up both in therapy and relationships as well as society. And I then attended one of Bill's workshops, watching couples that are polar opposite on the political spectrum actually get a different type of connection. It was super powerful. So his history, he was a professor of family and social science at the University of Minnesota, directing the Minnesota Couples on the Brink project. And he also, along with his daughter, has developed the Doherty Relationship Institute and the Foundation for Social and Civic Well-Being. So I think what makes Bill stand out is that he uses his clinical expertise to step outside of the therapy room, and he applies these principles to some of the most intractable social problems. He's actually been called on to speak to the U.S. Congress about depolarization. He gets legislatures in the same room who are from different political standings and to have real conversation. So he's had a very deep impact. He's also the co-founder of Braver Angels, which I am incredibly excited about. It's one of the largest grassroots bipartisan organizations in America, and it's dedicated to reducing the political polarization. So after a single workshop in 2016, Braver Angels has grown and has now facilitated over 2,000 workshops nationwide, getting conservatives and liberals into the room together to have these difficult conversations that many of us avoid at the family dinners. He will talk about the type of counseling that he has pioneered called discernment counseling, which is an approach for couples when one partner's leaning out of the marriage and the other desperately wants to save it. And part of the process, attorneys seeing that there's so many divorces where the couples actually land in a lot of ambivalence about the divorce, and getting people in to the same room or to inside themselves to have these difficult explorations is really, really important. So anyway, great conversation. He dives deeper into all of this. So whether you're struggling with political divisions in your own family, coping with your own relationship ambivalence, or if you're a therapist wondering how to help clients whose relationships are fractured right now by all the current events, I really think you're going to get a lot out of this conversation. I mean, I know I did. So let's jump in. Well, why don't you tell us, just introduce the audience to you and your work thus far, and then we'll jump off from there.
Yeah, well, I'm in baseball a utility player. I can play lots of different roles. So I a long-term therapist, particularly working with couples on the brink of divorce is my recent specialty. And I can train therapists in particular in the craft of therapy, the real, how to use the therapist relationship, how to structure sessions. And then, everything from that to the sort of big picture about how do we contribute to social change and solving community problems and everything in between. So I do lots of different things and never decided to focus on one, and it keeps me alive. I taught at the University of Minnesota for a long time, so I'm academic, I've done research, so lots of different things that I enjoy doing.
You're still at the University of Minnesota?
I retired about 6 months ago.
Oh, wow. I did not know that. And so there you were the director of Minnesota's Couples on the Brink project.
Yep,
Is that
yep.
right?
Taught family therapy.
Okay. You're also the director of Citizen Professional Center
Right, I was at the university. That's
at
right.
the university. That's amazing. And I know we'll drop in and talk about it today. I'm very interested in you're the co-founder of Braver Angels.
Yeah, and also with my daughter Elizabeth, the Doherty Relationship Institute, where we train therapists in this approach to called discernment counseling, specialized protocol for working with couples on the brink of divorce.
So tell us a little bit about discernment counseling.
It's a protocol of 1 to 5 session protocol for working with what we call mixed agenda couples, where one person is leaning out of the relationship, leaning towards divorce, and is ambivalent about doing therapy, and the other person wants to save the relationship. And that's actually a pretty common presentation in couples therapy. But often they bomb out in couples therapy because one of them isn't sure they even want to be in the room. And so this is a structured way to help them get clarity and confidence about a direction. And that could be either to do therapy or to go through with a divorce, or neither. But it's like pre-therapy, and it's about understanding what's happened and each person's contributions to the problems. And it's brief and focused and pretty intense.
Yeah, and how long have you been doing that?
Oh, about 20 years. I developed a protocol, and then about 16 years ago, worked with a group of collaborative divorce lawyers who were discovering how much what we call divorce ambivalence there is, even among people who get to their stage. But a lot of them have failed in couples therapy, and a lot of times the one leaning towards divorce is pretty reluctant to try again. And so I told them about this approach I had developed, which I didn't have a name for, but I knew I didn't want to do couples therapy when somebody was very ambivalent about being there, that you'd end up pursuing them and they end up to be the bad guy. And so I told them about what I do, and they said, yeah, we want to send people there. And what do you call it? And I said, well, I don't have a name for it. So we made up a name right there on the spot, discernment counseling.
How do you feel like it goes? Like after the 5 sessions, what do you see shifts or change? What impact does it have?
Well, people expand their understanding, their narrative about the relationship and how it got in trouble. We're all inside our own relationships have blinders. And so what we say is we want people to have a deeper understanding of what's happened to the relationship and each person's contributions to the problems. And so it's not about change, it's about understanding. And in fact, we clearly say it's not about change. Most of the time is spent with each person separately because they're in very different places. And if they decide to do couples therapy, they each develop a personal agenda for change, the things that they want to work on in themselves that would be showing up in any relationship. So it's a kind of a soul searching experience for people, deliberately not trying to improve the relationship.
Where you've gone with your practice in couples is to really see dynamics that exist when we get trapped and we get stuck. We feel like we can't get out. Some of us are more motivated to try to make a change than others. And the ways of communicating. I know when I heard you speaking at Psychotherapy Network, or your presentation was really compelling. You were showing couples who have serious divisions, and in these cases along political lines, where our defense system is so stacked up against the idea that we can open up to one another. And, it's what happens with couples, right? When they get really jammed up and stuck and like, ah. And one of the things that you guys had me really deeply thinking about is this idea that I guess we're both couples therapists. And if our country came to us in our sessions, if they could come to us and we would analyze what's going on, we would see all the 4 elements of divorce. We would see defensiveness, contempt, and all of those things. We would probably, very high accuracy, if this was a couple and the way that the different sides are treating one another, the likelihood of divorce would be a super high prediction. Wouldn't you agree?
Actually, I don't think that research is as good as people think it is. Those couples were not in therapy, the couples that John Gottman studied. There was no intervention.
Okay, so you're calling out the research.
Yeah, they were followed over time. And unfortunately, therapists who don't pay attention to that end up getting discouraged about people they see in therapy who show contempt for each other, for example. And I've known therapists to say, well, they're done for. Well, the couples in Gottman's study were not in therapy.
That's one thing that I've appreciated, as I said in the beginning, that the more I researched you, the more excited I got about talking with you, because the challenges you do in your work on therapists about how systems and biases impact how we work. And Sue and I love to talk about how much has impacted the research and the outcome and how we interpret it. And so I like that, right? Like, and I agree with you. Contempt does not actually mean divorce, right? But it means that we've been wedged in a way that makes it super hard to open up to one another and tolerate each other.
Exactly, exactly. So one of the reasons I just said no on that,
Yeah,
okay,
I love it. Challenge me.
is that therapists give up too easily. We get too discouraged because what you're describing often is a couple are stuck and the therapy is stuck. And then the therapists are apt to give up. And then the therapists make doomsday predictions. I have a research study on this where we surveyed 200 people who have been in relationship in couples therapy. And many of them reported the therapist saying, well, you guys are not going to make it. Really? Who nominated you to be God? So when we quote research out of context, a lot of times it supports our pessimism, which is really often about a sense of futility. So I'm very interested in stuck clinical systems, and I'm interested in stuck societal systems. And I bring always a sense of hope that we could figure something out.
And we could use that right now for sure. And I left with this sense of hope because we, as a country, we can't divorce one another. And I think you're right. So often we give up in relationships because the relationship feels almost intolerable with the differences that we exist. And then, like you mentioned also, if we feel hopeless and then our therapist matches us that hopelessness, there's a lot of ability for us to just say, give up on each other. So, like, one of the directions that you've taken, not only working with couples, but taking your knowledge about how to work with these really stuck, painful places to help the way that we have politically divided in the world right now, or in the United States in particular, even though I know it's happening everywhere, in this stuck place that is full of contempt. And we've cut off this ability, or I don't know about cutting off the ability, but we're really activated in a way that's precluding us from having deeper conversations. Families are dividing based on this kind of I give up activation. And that's where I'm really wanting the audience to hear about your journey in the focus both on the citizen therapist, but also your work. People came to you, and some of the work you've done of helping individuals on the far liberal and far conservative sides engage in these really powerful, difficult conversations, which we would, I think, both agree need to happen in couples. They have to learn to be able to reduce the threat enough to open up, and same with the country.
Yeah, it's about the containers we create. I mean, therapy is a container for a certain kind of process. And we're not responsible for the outcome of the couple or the client, but we're responsible for the container, for the process, for the structure. And that's what I brought to the world of the red blue couple, if you will, and not just married couple, but just around the country. Those principles whereby you create a setting, ground rules, structure, where people can listen to each other more deeply and where they are invited to do two things: to assert what's really positive about their side's point of view. Like in one of our exercises in our red blue workshop, in a fishbowl process where one group is in the middle and chairs in a circle and the other group is in the outside circle listening. When you're in the outside circle, you're there just to listen and learn about how these folks in the middle see themselves politically and to look for anything in common. And you don't interact, you just observe. And the two questions for the group in the middle, first one is, why are your side's values and policies good for the country? So crow about your side. Why is why is liberalism, conservatism, why is it good for our country? And then the second question is, what are your reservations or concerns about your own side? And that's the humility question. And we train the moderators to actually pull that out and not just people say, well, we're not good at messaging. No, okay, yeah, that's good. What else?
Not good at messaging. In other words, our message is really great. It's just our messaging.
We have bad PR or something. No.
Yeah.
And then they switch sides. The group in the outside goes to the middle, and the middle group goes outside. And after it, they process it in pairs, and then in the whole group with this two-part question: what did you learn about how people on the other side see themselves? Not how you see them, but how they see themselves. And did you see anything in common? And if you create this process and people bring even a basic goodwill, they will learn things that soften them to the other side. And a lot of times that humility question is what softens them, because you understand that these people are not just fanatics. Whereas if we go at it, which is the normal thing, what do you think of Trump? I hate him. Like you love him. How about the immigration policy? And it's just like a couple going, you like cats, I like dogs. You say up, I say down. And so we teach people how to slow down and listen to each other, which is a lot of what we do in therapy. And then they find common ground.
What's hard about that is even wanting to do it. So what you're saying is, and you travel around the country doing these kind of fishbowl groups with...
Well, I train people to do them. We've trained several hundred therapists. So a big part of this for me was, once I learned to do this, was not just to have yours truly flying around, but to train people to do it.
So you train people to go to different parts of the country.
Their own part of the country.
And to bring individuals who are in polar positions politically in the same room to have conversations and to really look at, can they actually deepen the kind of conversations? How do you get people to come to these?
So Braver Angels, we've been around since right after the 2016 election. It's a national nonprofit. As one of the co-founders. We decided to make it a membership organization. So we have 16,000 members, and to create chapters. So we have chapters all over. We call them alliances. And these are regular people who've been through workshops. The leadership has to be half red, half blue, and independence is in there as well. And then the local chapters sponsor workshops, and then moderators moderate them. Okay. So you and I have been focusing on the ones where we bring people together, small groups in dialogue. There's all kinds of other workshops where we teach even larger groups the skills to how to have these conversations. So there are several hundred trained moderators around the country, and then they connect with these chapters, and that's how these short workshops go on. We've also learned since the pandemic to do them online. So we have national workshops as well. So people who are not in an area where there's a local chapter can do it on Zoom online.
How did Braver Angels get started?
Well, it's an interesting story. People like to, they say, what was the big strategic plan? Well, I'll tell you. I was sitting at this desk a week after the 2016 presidential election. Remember that the country was stunned. Even Trump supporters were stunned, right? And got a call from a colleague of mine from New York City, David Blankenhorn, who had he and I worked on family and fatherhood issues for a long time. And he had been on the phone with another colleague of ours, David Lapp from Southwest Ohio. And they were talking about how people were feeling about the election in Manhattan and in South Lebanon, Ohio. Very different experiences. The world was ending in New York City. And in Southwest Ohio, it was morning in America. And they decided on the spur of the moment in that conversation to get 10 Hillary Clinton voters and 10 Donald Trump voters together for 13 hours over a weekend in early December of 2016 to see if they could talk with each other and not just about each other. So David Blankenhorn told me this, and I said, wow, that's really brave. What were you thinking of doing with them when you got them together? And he said they didn't know, but they thought I could figure that part out. And I chuckled. Actually, I was hoping I was not free. I mean, they already had it booked. and I just decided I had to do it. And
How did you feel about that? Were you anxious? Were you excited?
I was more anxious than for anything I've ever done professionally, by far. And I got my a local guy who's a consultant, and who to me, he and I've done a lot of group things together, group work. So I pulled out every stop I knew. Part of it is that I trained as a therapist and also as a group facilitator and designer of group process. So I have the dual training, which was possible back in the 70s. And then it went away. Therapists are generally not trained in group process. But I happen to have both of those. And I'd done a lot of work in communities for a number of years. So I pulled out every stop I knew, consulted with folks I knew. So we did it, and it was very powerful, very powerful. And, we began with, just like in therapy, why'd you come, right? You always begin with, you don't give a big lecture. Why are you here? What do you want to get out of this? And I knew it was going to work because people said, we have to stop fighting each other. We have children to raise here. We have schools and hospitals and roads to maintain. And we've just been fighting each other. We can't do this. We have to figure out a way to get along, even though we disagree.
So the motivation was often, it wasn't, I want to go and know thy neighbor. I want to cuddle up, to the opposite side. It was the bigger vision that we were holding, they were holding meaning. We need to work together, and the realization that brought them in the room.
This is our community here, and it's up to us to make it work. They were not there to convince somebody to change their mind. In fact, that's a big principle that emerged out of Braver Angels, is that don't try to change somebody. Try to understand them and communicate in a way that they may understand you. Don't try to change them.
So the Fishbowl, is that something that you did at the first one?
Yes.
The conversation you were having where you had the one sit in the middle and everybody on the outside. What I love about the Fishbowl is that as we're listening, because to me, I was saying, it'd be hard to want to, right? It's very activating, painful to listen to somebody who you feel like has such opposite views you feel like is threatening your values and your beliefs in the world. And the idea, I can imagine how activating if I was sitting here on the outside listening to the other side. So did you coach at all about how to listen or what
Nope.
to look?
Nope.
Nope. You just put them in, right?
Right. We have other workshops where we teach skills. I'm very clear of whether they're coming for an educational experience in which we teach about listening and teach them how to acknowledge. And this, we just create the experience. The key is the structure, because see, when you're not face to face with somebody, very few of us get a chance to observe people who are different from us in conversation with each other.
Okay? No, we were in our echo chambers, right?
Right, we're in our echo chamber, or you're one-to-one with somebody and you're activated. And here, if you're listening in, and notice the questions, the first question wasn't, do you think we should throw more immigrants out of the country? Okay. Or is Donald Trump a disaster or is he good? The question, the Fishbowl question is, why are your side's values and policies good for this country? So you're calling on people's core values, and you're going to have your chance as well. And it's for the good of the country, right? Part of what I've learned in this work is that we start our conversations too low. We start them around specific policies or specific politicians. If you start at the level of values and aspirations and hopes for our country, for our children, for future generations, you get much more a sense of commonality, or you get complementarity. You get, so you're really emphasizing individual freedom and the government not, stifling that. Okay, maybe my side, we're emphasizing more social responsibility and care for the poor, but we're not in different universes because each side cares. People do care about those other, but they emphasize certain values more. Whereas if you start with, a certain immigration policy or Obamacare or something like that, you don't get a chance to access people's deeper values and aspirations. And so you miss the common ground. So one of the things I learned in this is to not assume when people disagree with me politically around politicians and policies that we fundamentally have different values as human beings. Because policies are means to an end. And politicians are implementers of that. They are not the higher values. The other thing I learned is that people are driven all driven by concerns and worries, and that people who support political leaders, say, that I am appalled by, have worries about my side, deep worries. Most of us think of our own side as neutral to good, and the other side as bad to worse. Okay. And so, just as we know in therapy that people are driven by anxieties, right? I mean, just usually somebody who's highly controlling is highly anxious. We look to the softer feeling under the hard feeling. Well, this can happen in across political conversations as well. So if I'm dealing with a couple who are divided by politics, but also we've done this exercise with elected officials. I've done this, what I'm going to describe now, with members of Congress, where everybody gets 5 uninterrupted minutes to answer this question. What life experiences have influenced your values and beliefs about public policy and public service? What life experiences have influenced your values and beliefs about public policy and public service? 5 minutes. They know the question's coming, small groups. You don't have to build on what anybody else says. You just tell your story. I've done this with state legislators, even members of Congress. There are tears in the room, always. And you can imagine people talk about their families, and they talk about support and tragedy, loss and ideals. It's very powerful. At the end of one of these, I always ask people what they're taking with them. And a guy he introduced himself, a member of Congress. I'm as conservative as the day is long, but I am a pragmatist, and we have to try to be bipartisan. That's why he was there. But he said, you can't fight somebody in the same way when you know their heart. You can't fight somebody in the same way when you know their heart. Isn't this what we do in couples therapy? So we don't occupy different moral universes, okay? We are not that unalike. Then something magical can happen.
Well, one of the things those questions are getting to, and the fact that that was one thing I discovered in research, that you were actually invited to speak to the U.S. Congress about how to depolarize in 2021, and I just thought the fact that you would be called in, and that I can hear that they actually dove in and participated on this very, that's like my fantasy, right? Getting, because one of the things I'm hearing is that you're bringing them into their heart too, right? Like we get so stuck in our head about issues that we believe in versus immigration or abortion that we forget to recognize that they're based on values and our early experiences and our own, as we would say it, attachment histories. And so it sounds like you invited people, very first question, inward and in our heart. And as we go into our heart and out of our head, we're going to be in a more secure place to listen, to open up, and to see the commonalities, and that it's a value driven thing. So if somebody disagrees with you, they're disagreeing. It's so easy to believe that somebody that falls on the opposite end of you is moralless. And then to listen feels like you're giving up yourself to even stay in a relationship with somebody that would vote for somebody that did this.
Yeah, you named it. And this is what's happening with couples who are 10% of couples are Republican Democrat, 10% married couples. And prior to Trump, they were mostly doing pretty well. Okay, they had accommodated that. But now, particularly the blue, or the more liberal, the anti-Trump folks, who tend to be in heterosexual couples, the wife and the husband's more apt to be the Trump. They're finding it intolerable. And my clinical approach to that is that this is a differentiation of self issue. That if I cannot self-regulate, knowing that you voted for somebody that I am opposed to, I have to change you in order to self-regulate, to feel good about myself. That's my problem, not your problem.
Let's go slow and repeat that again. So if I have to, and what we're talking about is differentiation, right? If I can't sit with you and have you believe separate from me, and I can't change you, if I can't tolerate it, it's my problem, is what you're saying, that I can't tolerate it. So if I'm sitting there and my husband is a Trump supporter, and I believe that Trump is literally hurting people, responsible for distress. If I really believe to my toes, then to listen to my husband or my uncle or my cousin or any family member, then it feels to me that I have to tolerate this belief that this person doesn't care, that they're supporting somebody that's causing trauma and hurt. And so that's very painful, very activating. So how do you help me?
Yeah, well, a couple things. Well, one is this person in your life badgering you, trying to get you to change?
Sometimes,
Well,
yeah, in
okay, well, I
couples,
mean, yeah. So I mean,
yeah.
so the first thing is you have to have boundaries. Okay, so it's not that I'm going to say you have to, accept this other person when they are invading your boundaries. Okay.
Yeah, they're like, you know what? You're being ridiculous. You're just making too big of a deal of this. Yeah, he does this and this, but you're making way too big of a deal of it. Just
Yeah.
wait.
So if I have them both together with that person who is dismissing the other, then I would challenge them about their disparagement, their contempt, their sense of superiority, and the very unproductive and hurtful way they're coming across. However, I'm also going to challenge the one who is the other one who moralizes it, because a lot of times what happens is people who really are appalled by Trump, I'll even say hate Trump, they can't get at him, so they turn the person in their life into a mini version of the politician they hate, and then they work out their own feelings on that person.
So they're not differentiating. What you'd be challenging is a lack of differentiation that I may be having or this individual may be having between the politician and the person in front of you. So because I can't get to the politician who I believe is creating harm, but I can to my uncle or my husband or my aunt, then I'm going to then demonize them or be moralistic to them in order to satisfy the activation that I'm having.
Yeah, would you please change so that I can feel better?
Yes. And I could not feel threat anymore by this politician.
It's not going to not have me feel threatened by the politician, but can I self-regulate knowing that somebody I'm close to supports that, right? So take me out of my pain in the relationship that you are not more like me.
Oh, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah. It's highlighting this very painful difference in that relationship. And so that's a highly differentiated space. Can I tolerate this person who feels ostensibly to be different? And then what you were mentioning earlier, I think by the exercises in the fishbowl, is that I'm over projecting probably that difference based on the politician that this person's values are the same. And so you're moving us into a value discussion.
That's right. There are many reasons why people vote the way they do and support the politicians they do. And a lot of times people are unaware of the fears of the other side, of people who are close to them about the other side. That there's a story in Braver Angels, we say that behind every passionate political view, there's a story. And if you can get to the story, if you can try to understand somebody's vote or preference in the light of their history, their biography, their story. But there's two parts of this. You have to be able to set limits on somebody who's trying to change you. So the first step may have to be, I don't want our conversations dominated by your comments about such and such. It's overwhelming our relationship. And I have the sense that you're trying to convince me of something. And so please stop that. Let's talk about that. But it also means I have to treat you the same way.
And not try to influence and persuade and dominate.
Right, right. So people who are interested in seeing me work with couples, actually, they could Google Braver Angels YouTube Loved Ones Divided. Okay, and there are 4 couples who were willing to have me interview them, coach them in front of live Zoom audiences. And I'm thinking about one of them right now, where she was the blue, and she would every time she got outraged watching MSNBC about something Trump did, she would bring it up to her husband who had voted for him. And it was like, don't you see? Can't you finally come around with this latest outrage? She didn't say that directly, but she wasn't just commenting on the news. She was frequently bringing stuff up. Basically, the message was, can't you see what a fool you are? Now, what he did was tell her she was being naive. He was a little bit more up on the facts in the news, and so he would poke at her facts being wrong. So he was doing his part in that. But it's so interesting when I show that video to couples therapists, they identify with the woman. She's saying, I just want to be able to share my views and talk about this. And then he shuts me down, and then he tells me I'm naive. And so the therapist really identify with the wife. And they miss the fact that in that situation, she's the one pushing in his boundaries. He's doing a bad job of protecting his boundaries. He counters, he does that stuff. He's got to change that stuff. And we talked about it.
Yeah, because he's being belligerent as well by you're being naive. And yeah,
Right.
but
Yeah.
we're
No,
missing.
absolutely. Absolutely. But she's doing this. I just need to talk about because this is so important to me. And to a therapist, it looks like she wants to connect. And we're junkies for connection. But what I point out is she's connecting without good boundaries because her connection has a hook. It's like, I want to tell you about this thing I just saw that Trump did. There's a hook in there. And the hook is, won't you finally see the light and change?
Boy, I can relate to that experience so well.
Yeah. And so and what I helped her see is she's not going to get the sense that she wants to be able to talk to her husband about what's troubling her. And this is a crazy world. And, most of us would like to be able to share the feelings we have about what's going on. It's not going to work to share those feelings unless you're respecting the other person's boundaries. And then on his end, he would become invisible about his own viewpoints and just sort of one up her. And so what I do in these videos is I coach them on this. Well, first of all, I have them do an enactment of how they normally talk, and then I coach them on it, and then I have them do another enactment. And it's sort of, maybe it's because I've been doing all these workshops with Reds and Blues. I'm willing to have this be live, and I don't know what's going to happen. So it's sort of, I'm not going to let them fail miserably. I will intervene if I have to. Then they have a more boundaried conversation that actually has some intimacy in it.
So in that boundaried conversation, what do you encourage each one of them to do? Because what I hear you're pointing out is so helpful. I'm hearing what you're pointing out is under the guise of connection, and this can be, and it doesn't have to be political. Under the guise of connection, we can approach our partner, our aunt, our uncle. I don't want it to just be a romantic dynamic. We can approach somebody because we're activated, we're feeling something, we're feeling hurt, etc. And we have this deep desire to be heard. And that's that attachment desire, right? Like we're feeling pain, we're feeling activated, and we want to be caught. But what we miss is that our attempt to be caught is actually our attempt to be caught in a way that the other person disappears. It's that I think what I hear you saying is the lack of differentiation. In order for you to catch me and for me to feel caught, I need you to agree with me. I need you to agree that this is a painful thing that happened. I need you to see the error in your ways. I need you to apologize. I need you to see how screwed up last night at the dinner conversation with our friends went. So I'm approaching it from that place. And what you're saying is that what you're helping to hear is the desire to connect is good. And therapists can get really misled in, yes, your desire to connect is good. But what I hear you saying is that she didn't connect to herself first about what she really needs and what's really happening. And maybe she heard something that's really painful and is activating for her. And what she's reaching for with him needs to be more about her pain and her experience of hearing it, not pulling him in to finally see the error in his ways.
That's right. And then when she gets that, and then he gets that he needs to show up too and not just push her away and go one up. And then there's a chance for an actual connection. And then that's what I see. They're softer with each other. And in the latest video on YouTube, he admitted that he's really scared too about what's going on in the country. Now, he's scared of the Democrats as well as Republicans, okay? And she's not as scared as the Democrats. So they think about the problems somewhat differently, but they're both deeply worried about the country. So he opened up with that, which he could do more readily because she was not telling him he had to change.
Because in that push to change, he inevitably, as humans will, he has to defend his position because either, he's an idiot or an ass, right? So instead of seeing himself as an idiot or an ass, he's going to say, "No, you're being naive," right? That
Exactly.
pushback.
He does one up.
Yeah, he ones up. Let me tell you why, and I have all this information you don't have. And I can think of a million conversations that I have been either one of those people in a conversation, and how much my desire has been and consistently to sort of shift to get inside and to want to get inside. That's why we have to first be motivated to look at ourselves, because there's so much of us now in our division that says, "I'm sick of it. I'm done." I hear people say that all the time. I'm done, which is my point at the beginning, is like, we can't divorce as a country, right? Like, we can walk away from a relationship because our activation is so high and we're not taking the time, and the contempt is felt, but we're not taking the time to do the self exploration and the personal challenge that could actually, as you and I both know as couples therapists, can lead to some of the deepest growth ever.
Right.
When we do that.
Absolutely. And so here's the additional challenge. The therapist, when it's a political difference in the couple. Most therapists, not all, but most are blue, most are liberal. And so most with the couples that I saw, in the YouTube thing, the therapist would be in your therapist's own mind would be, yep, right about that one. Yep, yep, yep. And so because almost everybody's concerned about our country and its politics, it's a particular challenge. A lot of times couples bring us problems that, specific problems that I never had that particular problem. Okay. I don't have a fixed view about it. I don't argue in other settings about the same thing. Sometimes I do, but a lot of times not. And so here's something that really worries me, because therapists I've done some training with in this sort of dealing with what I call political stress, tell me that when they're in their case consultation groups and they bring up these couples that are politically divided, their colleagues in the group say, "I don't know why she stays with him." They get activated and they take a side. And so I'll go on a little rant here about how therapists can view relationships, permanent relationships, marital relationships, as transactional. Because if you're dating somebody and you don't like their politics, move on. You don't owe them the hard work to figure out how can I differentiate and just move on. But when you've made a lifelong commitment to somebody, and you probably have kids, you have all this life built up, it's a whole different thing than to say, I don't want to deal with you anymore. And it really troubles me, and this is part of my career in working with couples around commitment and therapists, is that a lot of therapists hate the transactional nature of our politics. Okay, it's not a commitment to anything. It's like, what's it going to do for me now? That's so much out there. But we can fall into that when it comes to family relationships. Your parents who are politically different, your adult kids, or your spouse. We can fall into the same trap.
Yeah, boy, thinking about how much as therapists we really do take the long haul perspective in the community and what we need to do and what we need to tolerate to get in and stay in, and that you can't just say, "I'm done," right? Like, we're part of the citizen movement of helping, as you speak in some of the things that I've read about helping help have a healthy democracy. And a healthy democracy is having abilities to talk through and find our shared values for our shared country. And what I hear you saying for couples work, that as therapists, we can move out of that and into transactional and be too caught up in the moment of activation and the relief of the moment of that activation. Like, why didn't she just leave him? Because I think I hear you saying, well, we are overwhelmed with what we would have to tolerate or deal with inside our own body to be listening to knowing that our partner differed.
Right, that's right. Although I wish I agreed with you that most therapists think of themselves as committed to our democracy and the bigger picture, because that's not our training.
Well, that's true. That's true.
I mean, I had to come to this. This was not my training. We're trained as clinicians to maybe and to hopefully be healers in the privacy of our offices. And some of what happens when we are citizens is that we don't bring what we know as therapists. We don't bring the idea that behind every passionate political belief, there's a story. We hate what they say. So after designing these red blue workshops, the next one I designed was a skills workshop, skills for disagreeing better. Okay. I was back east, Maryland, I think, and did this one of the early versions of this workshop, and there were about 30 people there, and it's a skills workshop, and there were about a dozen therapists there because I know some colleagues who came, they brought their colleagues, and at the end I asked people, what are you taking with you? And a couple of the therapists said some version of, well, I know these skills. I mean, they're listening skills, expressive skills. I didn't make them up. They said, but I never thought to apply them to political conversations. So you get therapists who, in the privacy of their office, in their role, don't get activated by clients that much. They listen deeply. They go for the soft feelings under the heart. All of the stuff we're trained to do. But when it comes to somebody in their life who votes the wrong way, they judge them, they moralize, they overtalk them, they don't listen. I should say we, because we haven't learned that a part of our job, in my belief, is to bring our skills to the public domain.
I'm wholeheartedly, and I know Sue Marriott wholeheartedly agrees with you that is our role. And to be able to, I saw a talk where, also talking about our own beliefs about things that we know from a deep perspective, like getting out of the political discussion, but into the human rights and into things like that. Those are not political. They're not Democrat or Republican. We can talk about human rights. We can talk about those kind of things. And the encouragement is to bring our skills into as citizens and as part of democracy. I really do see how important it is.
So let me pick you up on that, because some of what I've learned is that if I'm going to be effective in the public domain, I have to learn about the different language systems that reds and blues use. Just as working with a couple, I have to learn how they use language, how they construct reality. Otherwise, I can't be helpful. So part of what I have learned as sort of a therapist working on polarization is to be cautious about even words like human rights. That's a blue term, unfortunately, but just like love of country or self-sufficiency has become a red term. Social justice is a blue term. And so if I want to communicate most effectively to people who are not already agreeing with me, what I choose to do, and we train people to do this, is to use synonyms, to use a sentence instead of a keyword. So it's subtle, okay? It's subtle. I mean, who's against social justice? But the term has gotten certain kinds of meaning. It's become a blue term. It turns reds off. Like, who's against fiscal responsibility? If you're in public office, you have to be fiscally responsible. But that's become a red term. And we do workshops for elected officials, too. If you want to be effective in a world where language is contested, it can be very helpful to become a student of that language, of those languages, and then find some ways to either use different terms or to signal to somebody that you understand that they may define certain rights, human rights. So it may be on your list of human rights that you're advocating for. Something like property may not be on there if you're blue. But if you think about it, yeah, of course.
Or gun ownership,
No, but just take property.
Yeah, property. Okay.
Property. Blues aren't against that, but when they use the word human rights, it may not be there. But for a conservative, that's going to be high up there. And guns would be an example. But just is the government going to overregulate and I'm going to lose my property? So what I've learned is I can signal that I get that.
There's so much to this. I'm just buzzing with it. But by using the word human rights, I've already lost. If I'm trying to have a discussion that goes beyond the divide, this is not just, we're not just talking about being able to have a Thanksgiving dinner where we don't fight, right? We're not going to change the other person to go from a red to blue or blue to red. That's just not going to happen. But right now, we are responsible, like people joining your movement, to go and listen to be able to hear one another because we are one country. And we want to be able, everybody, I think, wants to get out. When I won't speak everybody, most people are tired of the polarization and the divide, right? We could have a whole nother conversation about why all of a sudden this is so activating through 2016 when we already had differences, but now it's intolerable. But part of our job, if we are really deeply motivated to getting out of the polarized division and connecting on these things that we find highly valuable, is to recognize and listen to the other side. If I'm listening in one of your circles and I'm hearing somebody talk about, they hear the word human rights, they think of they already click off, they quit listening because now I've categorized myself. And so by opening up and hearing that we share values across the term human rights, that then we're going to be able to open up and hear more deeply what it is that they're afraid of. Like this husband is also afraid, may not agree with the Democrats, but he is also afraid. We're going to connect on what we're afraid and what we need to do. And we don't have to agree on everything about each one of those topics, but by decreasing the sense of threat is on us to decrease it. And I know liberals have been, I thought of that with your questions, like what has our policy been? Well, it is pretty moralizing. The liberals are known, and it's part of the activation right now, to be very moralistic. So the challenge on that, right? Like, how do you talk about human rights in a way that's not moralistic or doesn't have a tag term?
Yeah. So let me respond to that. Which area of concern about human beings in this country? Go specific. Go specific. Okay. Are you talking about healthcare? And there, the term right to healthcare is a contested term. I don't start there. I start with everybody having access to high quality healthcare that is also affordable. Okay, so you notice I put in the affordable. And maybe we could start with children because it's going to be more contested when we get to adults who, the so-called able-bodied adult who won't work and that kind of thing. That's for later. I mean, how many are there? But if you start there, if you start with Medicare for all, you start too low. And then somebody says, well, it's a boondoggle already. And then you go, no, I read this. But if you start with what kind of world do we want in terms of people having access to good quality healthcare that is sustainable, is affordable, that we can have other things that we don't put all of our money into that basket. And then we could agree that there's waste and fraud that we should get out. So one of the principles I've learned in this is to always find something to agree with before I disagree.
Yes. Connect before you correct. Yes.
Exactly. Okay. But that some of it is learning about language. Now, I'm kind of role taking therapists who may be listening to this who could say, why should I bother? I understand. Not everybody has to be doing what I'm doing here. Okay. But I'm just offering this as a way to think about how good therapists are language artists. We know how to phrase things and frame things. We know how to listen for the language system of our client and then adapt it. I mean, we are good at it. Our work is a conversational art form. If you choose to, you can apply that in the public domain as well, if you choose to.
And motivating therapists to choose to is part of your mission.
Well, I don't think of it as motivation has to come from within, but maybe I can inspire some folks to. What I can say is it keeps me from despair. Our country's in so much trouble, and I'm still upbeat because I'm at least in the fray. I'm working on it. I'm working on the polarization. Okay. And in Braver Angels, anybody who wants to get involved, actively in Braver Angels, leadership is half red, half blue. So I'm on Zoom calls and meetings all the time with people who think differently than I do about politics. But we have a higher cause. We have a higher cause of healing America and of figuring out a way to get along and to create policies that we can agree on. We have a higher cause, but we think differently about policies and politicians.
And you've been called in in many different ways. Obviously, when politicians are coming to you or US Congress comes and say, come and talk to us, right? We're seeing that nothing is happening with this division. Like we can't just keep waiting it out and flipping, flopping, and flipping, flopping. We've got to find a way to have deeper conversations and get out of this idea that there's one is the right way. So I really applaud what you guys are doing. I know in looking at some of the conventions that you've had, you had one where you had the leader of Black Lives Matter and the leaders of the Tea Party come and give talks to the same
No,
audience.
not talk,
Oh,
a
say more.
conversation,
Oh, thank you.
a facilitated conversation.
And how did that go?
It went great.
Really?
They both have profound mistrust for government.
Yeah, of course. So they found these commonalities that get out of, because through social media, I think when I kind of know we're going to have to wrap this up, I think I could talk easily with you for another hour. But like with social media, I think that's part of the pain point because we have the differences amplified. And of course, in my experience too, we have some leaders who are willing to amplify it, who are willing to villainize in this active way. And when any of us feel villainized, we get shut down and we arm up. And so this journey is to take our armor off so that we can make a difference and have more hope. But we can't save our planet if we can't come together on some level of connection.
And there has to be connection with boundaries.
Mm-hmm.
I don't tolerate people telling me that I'm misguided and they're going to lecture me. I don't tolerate that. So it's not mushy gushy. So among our skills we teach are skills for difficult moments, how to set boundaries, how to exit a conversation.
Why don't you give us some of those, few of those skills before we exit? I've got listeners out there going, please tell us how to do it.
Yeah. So a principle is neither be a victim nor a perpetrator. So don't just sit there or stand there and take it. Okay. But also don't counterattack because then you're in the soup with people. So we have soft exits, medium exits, hard exits. A soft exit would be this conversation isn't productive anymore, so I'd like to move on. You notice I didn't say you're not being productive. You're being unreasonable. This conversation is not. Okay. Another one is what you just said crossed the line for me into personal attack. So let's move on. And then what we say is if you get anything other than an apology, then you exit. But distinguish a personal attack from I am activated by what you said. The personal attack is you are an idiot or you're in bed with such and such. We teach elected officials this. You're a personal attack, not this I'm in high dudgeon because you said something about immigrants that, no, personal attack. And the last one, the hard X that I got from my daughter, she does this on social media. She said, I don't stay in a conversation and defend my integrity. So we're done. But none of those were attacks. None of those were you are a terrible person. But this conversation is now beyond what I want to do.
So you're not pointing at the person and you're not saying you're being A, B, and C. You're saying the impact of this conversation on me is, and therefore this is what I want to do. And this is what I need to do.
That's right. Yeah. The first one, though, isn't about that even. It's just not productive anymore. So let's move on. You have to have boundary setting skills to wade into this. I'm not suggesting everybody be mushy and take endless grief. But I'm suggesting that we not view ourselves as the enlightened moral arbiters and be superior to other people and come across in that sort of insufferable way that turns them off and drives them further into their own beliefs.
And that isn't, by doing that, we're not making any changes. And so this idea of differentiation is so important because we get moralistic because the pain of this is so high that we believe this moralistic thing protects our pain in a way, and it protects our identity. So I think of how much people are cutting off family members because the idea of being in relationship with somebody feels like it's such a personal compromise. And there are times you cut. I mean, if it's abusive and you can't get out of it, there are times to cut, but it certainly has been amplified so much, where we're seeing so much cuts in families since 2016. Would you agree with that?
Absolutely. I think family cutoffs ought to be rare tragedies. Sometimes they're tragic necessities, but rare. And a lot of it is that we have taught ourselves, and therapists are part of this. We could have another conversation on this. We've taught people to emphasize their fragility. We've taught them that if there's a lot of toxicity coming their way, their job is to cut off or to get the other person to admit it. And if they don't, to cut off. And instead of using these as opportunities to work on good boundary setting and to create your own safety while in connection, knowing there are exceptions, these are opportunities for growth, if you will. We have a workshop called Families and Politics, and we talk about the family gladiator, okay? You can develop your ability to manage yourself, self-management with difficult people. The first is don't try to change them as persons. And the second is to see if you can use some skills like finding something to agree with. When you have a gladiator and I'm with you on that. Yeah, what you just said there, I am with you 100%. I go, whoa. And then we have a skill that I think I invented. Maybe somebody else did, but a lot of these skills are generic, but a pivot skill. And that is somebody's coming on strong. Before you say anything about your own opinion, you could say, I have some thoughts about that if you're interested in hearing about them. And make sure they say yes.
Bring some consent.
Yeah, make sure they consent. Otherwise, you could move to exit the conversation. But a pivot is a checking out, is it my turn now? Are you willing to listen now? If they ride past you, you have choices to make. You could either stay in the listening role or you could exit. But I don't share my views on anything important with somebody who's on a roll unless they give me a signal that they are now ready to pass the ball to me. And then if they have done that and they interrupt me in the first sentence, I'll say, so you just said I could take my turn. Are you willing to hear me out? So what I'm saying is that these skills have a toughness in them as well as the sort of the soft and hard skills.
And as we said a little while ago, checking your own capacity. Are you in a listening role, or in you holding your breath to try to convince to change? And so being able to be asking questions in a way that offers you the opportunity to hear and then find shared values and then ask to be listened to. Those are not easy skills. They sound easy, don't they? Not so much.
No, they're not so much. But also you could try something, use your therapist skill of deciding with somebody who really differs from you that you're going to spend a half an hour just listening to them and asking them questions. You're not going to share your own view at all. I did that after the last election. I called a Braver Angels colleague and friend who had voted differently than I did. I wanted to know why. And we had a half an hour in which I just basically, I was like a friend and an anthropologist. How could he have gotten to where it was very complex how he got to where he was.
So what skills did you have to implement inside you? Because I think we all need those skills when we are hearing somebody express their views and they're activating to you, right? My guess is some of what he was telling you, probably, especially since it was right after the election, like you're feeling all these things. What skills do you have to do to be able to open up and actually spend that time listening?
Well, the big thing is the attitude, is this self-check, because the skills are not hard. The skills are, tell me more, and let me clarify that, and how would you respond to this point of view? The biggest thing is inside.
That's what I'm talking about, right?
Genuine curiosity.
Is very hard to find when you're activated, but it's so important.
That's right. And so that was the nature of this call. And we ran out of time, and he said, next call, I want to hear why you voted the way you did.
And did he follow up?
No, but we will at some point.
Yeah. Well, this was super, super helpful and intriguing, and I want to hear more. For those that are interested in Braver Angels, how do they get involved? Can you speak a little bit more about Braver Angels and how they might be interested?
Go to the website, Google Braver Angels, join, costs $12 a year. We have some online e-courses, 50-minute e-course that gives you a little sense of what we're up to. For those who would really like to get involved, you could train to become a moderator. Lots of therapists are moderators. It's all online and self-paced, and it's free. We don't charge for training moderators, and we ask them never to charge for doing a workshop. And so we depend on other sources of revenue. And then people who would be very interested in watching me work with these couples, Braver Angels YouTube Loved Ones Divided, and those interviews are there, and they can see, clinically how I would work with couples like that. So exciting. We have 15,000 members. We're all over the country, and most of it's volunteer driven. It's the only organization I've been in where volunteers have important positions of authority. We have folks who are volunteering 40 hours a week. I've been a volunteer the whole time. So it's a great way, if you're interested in this bridging the divides, it's a great way to get involved.
Well, it's a great way to actually have some kind of hope that there's something to do, sitting there and saying, I'm sick of it and I'm done with this. And it's understandable when you're in a lot of pain, but to put it into some kind of agency to change self and learn is incredibly motivating. So, and for the listeners out there, everything that he brought in today will be in our show notes. So feel free to kind of check that out, and we'll have all the resources. And anything else you want to share, we'll be glad to put in our show notes.
Yeah, my book, Becoming a Citizen Therapist.
Say more about that.
Yeah. This is a book I wrote with my colleague Ty Mendenhall, and it's kind of the culmination of 25 years of work of different projects. I mean, a project I started at the same time as Braver Angels is a Police and Black Men project. I've been facilitating a group of police officers and Black men in Minneapolis for some years. And so chapters on these various groups and activities. So Becoming a Citizen Therapist, APA published that.
Okay. I'm very excited. Might have to bring you back on to talk about it another time. So,
well, thank you for this interview. And your questions were searching and deep. And I'm not used to somebody when I do my bullet point and they go, oh, I need a couple more sentences on that. So I appreciated your interview style.
Oh, thank you. Well, I enjoyed it very much. Thanks, you guys, for joining us. I hope you got as much out of having this conversation as I did. And if you did, take the time to pass it on. Those of you that listen to Therapists Uncensored share so much of what we're speaking about today, and that is trying to look at ourselves more deeply, bridge divides, the division out there. So pass it on. Also take the time to rate and review. That really helps people find us. Thanks so much for listening, and we'll see you around the bend.
Therapist Uncensored is Ann Kelley and Sue Marriott. This podcast is edited by Jack Anderson.